Hello interstellar everyone, welcome to class 11 biology. In this video on chapter 14 respiration in plants, let us discuss about glycolysis. Right, so glycolysis it means splitting of sugar. So glycolysis as a term, it is derived from two Greek words. So those two Greek words are glykos and lysis. Glykos sugar che, lysis splitting. So glycolysis means splitting of sugar. Right, so glycolysis is a chemical reaction, or it's a metabolic reaction in which the sugar is broken down. So glycolysis as a metabolic pathway, it is also called as EMP pathway. So glycolysis is a metabolic reaction, it's a metabolic pathway. And glycolysis la ming shimba jinga zu khari yor lawa imba na EMP pathway ge lawor. So EMP pathway lawo yumzen khare lawa imba na it was discovered by three scientists, right? So glycolysis, it was figured out. The scheme of glycolysis was figured out by three scientists, Gustav Emden, E.D. Emden Gimingneche, right? M la the current scientist, Otto Meyerhoff, M. Meyerhoff la the Gimingneche, and P.D. Pranas, Jacob Pranas la Stoa. So, glycolysis, it is also called as EMP pathway, based upon the name of these three scientists who figured out the glycolysis process. Okay, so DJ. The glycolysis kala tordi roji shewe mana kharla wore. Glycolysis, I told you, it is splitting of sugar, right? And it is the first step which is common for both aerobic as well as anaerobic respiration. I told you in my last video that glycolysis is the common step for both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Organism chiki aerobic respiration chiki yonere, anaerobic respiration chiki yobemenere. Splitting of sugar or glycolysis is common for both. Okay, so especially in anaerobic respiration, right? Anaerobic organisms, glycolysis is the only process in the respiration, right? Anaerobic respiration chinge organism chig yobe imba na odi gi subu nanglo la respiration la di glycolysis chekbo ma do di jela khegu jo mar. So glycolysis is the only process in the respiration. Okay, so that is the one. And the process, right, in which the glucose undergoes partial oxidation to form two molecules of pyruvic acids, that is called as glycolysis. The glycolysis ki definition so the daily ngudwa. So gang dige da khare point ni cha so. The point so dikhare the third one, the process in which glucose undergoes partial oxidation, which means the glucose, it does not break down completely, it is broken down partially to form two molecules of pyruvic acid. So glucose is a 6-carbon compound, and this 6-carbon compound is broken down into 2 3-carbon compound, that is pyruvic acids. Two pyruvic acids produce chigre. And this process called glycolysis, it happens in the cytoplasm of the cell, right? The location de nenga chimburta glycolysis la ki pathway di khwala chungore cell gi nalo khwala chungore la wimbana cytoplasm nalo chungor. Okay, so it happens in the cytoplasm of the cell, right? Now this is the complete step of the glycolysis, right? The glycolysis, like, it's a 10-step process. Dinalo step chuyore and step rare la ani enzyme rare yor. So glucose, it is not simultaneously broken down into or instantaneously broken down into 2 pyruvic acid. Glucose ne mashar ke pyruvic acid ni la tak lan chag mare. It is a step-by-step process. I told you respiration is a step-by-step process in which glucose is broken down. Right. So glycolysis, which is common for both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, it involves partial oxidation of glucose. The glucose is broken down into two molecules of pyruvic acid, and it happens in 10 steps. There is step 2 here. Figure number 14.1. Study right. So along with the name of the metabolites formed, right, there is here orange the enzyme involved at each step, right? For example, when glucose is broken down, or when glucose, it is converted into glucose 6 phosphate, which enzyme is involved? Hexokinase enzyme, right? So orange tikyo dige step by step kare so enzyme ki action ko wala chigyo me dityo, right? And glucose 6 phosphate the fructose 6 phosphate la convert che di stu gi chigore isomerase phosphoglucoisomerase la enzyme dige chigore. So like that, I have given you the name of the enzymes as well. But for class 11, you don't need to know the enzyme's name. Or enzyme dige ming dige ha ko mar enzyme kang kashe cha ko na tigir. hexokinase la diche ani glucose form ma chen ne photosynthesis na lo form che yogi sucrose ta photosynthesis के end product sucrose che ani starch ta dinzo ma breakdown che du zambala invertase enzyme la jor glucose la convert che la glucose ta fructose la convert che la ani invertase enzyme la di ming themba nya ani glucose ne glucose 6 phosphate la convert che gi enzyme dikhare hexokinase la di ming te do tens log tem na lo la. So it is okay if you remember the names of the enzymes given in the textbook, right? You don't have to remember all these names over here, but in higher classes you will learn about all these enzymes. You have to study about all these enzymes, right? You can see over here that glucose, it is broken down into two pyruvic acid molecules in 10 steps, right? Through 10 steps. Steps you have to see at which steps ATP is utilized, right? Step ATP and step ATP synthesized how many ATPs are synthesized, right? Right, at which steps ATPs are synthesized and at which steps NADH are synthesized. And last you will realize what is the net production of glycolysis. Glycolysis nalola production is it clear? Right. So you can see over here at first step, right, step number the glucose ne glucose 6 phosphate la convert chidu zambala. What happens? One ATP is utilized. ATP toson toward the tadi arrow chitungu to ATP ne karchagdo ADP chagdo. So here ATP is used or it is utilized. Step thambu diliche. Step suba dile ya khachore ATP the toson toward ATP is utilized over here. So two ATPs are used. So the ATP call produce chigdu tada and step dele yorte, right? Phosphoglyceric acid 1,3 bisphosphoglyceric acid la esto del khachore ATP produce chigor. This phosphoglyceric acid, when it is converted into phosphoglyceric acid, 3 phosphoglyceric acid la convert chidu sambala ADP ne ATP produce chigdu. Okay, del ATP produce cheswa again. Yeah, last thama step dela phosphoenol pyruvate the pyruvic acid la convert chidu sambala ya khaji gore ATP produce chigor cheu so. Now data ATP doson khazu tosha ATP khazu synthesize chijala na ATP doson khazu du de ni du do ATP produce khazu chido. It seems as if only 2 ATPs are produced, but it's not like that. Here hariore triose phosphate ni orda 2 times triose phosphate ni din du zambala triose phosphate triose bisphosphate ni du zambala dela ATP khazu produce chigre ATP ni del produce chigre ini ma du zambala 2 phosphoenol pyruvate mindwe 2 do 2 du zambala ATP khazu produce chigre ni produce chigre. So kön domni ATP shida ba produce chigorda. Yeah, right, at this particular step. I will write over here. Here 2 ATPs are produced. ATP they are produced because there are 2 triose bisphosphates. And again there are 2 ATPs produced over here. ATP ni produced chigore khajin rela women de la khajore phosphoenol pyruvate ke near. So 2 khajuchas ATP shithama chaswa. So how many ATPs are synthesized? 4 ATPs are synthesized. How many ATPs are utilized? 2 ATPs are utilized. Glucose ma breakdown chidu zambala glycolysis kabla ATP khajo utilize chigore ni toson tuor synthesize khajo chigore shithama chigor so isem nalanya NADH khajo suyudo NADH sosa delar do glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate di ani 1,3 bisphosphoglyceric acid la convert chidu zambala NADH khajo suyudo ele chik suyugyo rosto. But again tela ni yorda triose phosphate la ni yordela din zambala NADH ke khazu suyure ni suyur. So NADH khazu suyure 2 NADH are produced. So there are 2 NADH produced. So net production of glycolysis correct. Glycolysis ne ta kön domni ATP khazu suyure NADH khazu suyure la wimba na ati khachere shine ni de ma thero ATP ni do son ro. So net khazure 2 ATP or ATP ni 요거래 NADH 가지고 요거래 2 NADH ni. So 2 세우청소 2 NADH are produced, 2 ATPs are net production di 세우청소. 이래 adi kira zo kechin bu cha gorda you have to know the balance sheet respiratory balance sheet gel zi yedu zambala thanga dige nenga chmu cha gorda. Okay, so dije now the second important thing to know from glycolysis is the end product दिखा रहे the key product दिखा रहे लवे ना glycolysis का जी pyruvic acid चालू हुआ so after all these steps what is the end result? Pyruvic acids are formed. Two pyruvic acids are formed from splitting of this molecule. Okay, so dije now what happens to the pyruvic acid? The pyruvic acid produce chegyo chorwa. Adi fate khare. What is the metabolic fate of the pyruvic acid? What happens with the pyruvic acid? So it depends upon the metabolic need of the cell, right? And different cells they can handle pyruvic acid in different manner. So there are three major ways in which different cells handle pyruvic acid. So glycolysis के end product pyruvic acid लाया जोरवा. The handle manda cell manda की handle manda चीक रेसलर. इतना लखारी और handle चिना manda sum योरे ला दो. Sum दिखा रहे. Lactic acid fermentation, alcoholic fermentation, and aerobic respiration. Okay, so these are the three major ways in which pyruvic acid is handled by different cells. So those cells which prefer anaerobic conditions, right? So they will undergo anaerobic respiration. Konzo anaerobic respiration nal de anaerobic respiration chigir khajana no konzo anaerobic condition nal salon chigoro. So konzo nal khari yungure fermentation dingi ni yungur. Lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation, these types of fermentation or chemical reactions, it takes place in anaerobic conditions. Whereas aerobic respiration, it happens in the presence of oxygen. Right? Anaerobic condition in the absence of oxygen. So dela oxygen yomar. Anaerobic condition. Dela oxygen yore. Oxygen is present in aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration Krebs cycle. Right, so this is our next topic. Okay, so aerobic respiration. So let us look at these two, lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation, which takes place under anaerobic conditions. So the fate of pyruvic acids in anaerobic respiration, right, there are two, lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. So glucose, when it is broken down through glycolysis to produce two pyruvic acid ni ragro. So pyruvic acid ni rayo di chadu zambala. Pyruvic acid ni ma chadu zambala. What it is broken down into lactic acids, right? And this happens in bacterial cells, right? Pyruvic acid can be broken down into lactic acids by bacterial cells, and in it happens in muscle cells. In animals, it happens in the muscle cells, right? Kisi muscle cell digela oxygen supply takta rag me na. Let us say during heavy exercise, you must have studied in your lower classes, right? During heavy exercise, right, the oxygen supply is insufficient to the muscle cells, but energy is required since you are doing heavy exercise. Muscle cell in the insufficient supply of oxygen, the glucose molecule is broken down to release energy, and the khari follow lactic acid fermentation follow. So glucose is broken down into pyruvic acid, and pyruvic acid is broken down into lactic acids. And the lactic acid produce muscle we get muscle cramps. So this is a form of fermentation, right? And this fermentation, lactic acid fermentation, is also done by unicellular prokaryotes. Prokaryotes means unicellular. So some bacteria, they will also do lactic acid fermentation. Okay, and then we have got alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation, example degree, we can take the example of yeast cells. So pub chang yedu zambala pub chang yedu zambala pub kharchin kya because pub nanglo yeast yore. This name is important. Yeast cells, right? Yeast is a fungal. It's a eukaryote, unicellular eukaryotic cell. Okay, and yeast cell, they will undergo anaerobic respiration. They will undergo something called alcoholic fermentation, in which end product of glycolysis, pyruvic acid, ethanol and carbon dioxide, right? Pyruvic acid is broken down into ethanol and carbon dioxide by the yeast cells, right? And here the result alcohol so this happens under anaerobic conditions. It happens in the absence of oxygen. Oxygen medu sambala. due to example ATP khasu produce chigore ni ginya la kharla so anaerobic respiration nanglo la glucose nanglo yoyo gi energy chasa ma thyen thu ko mar glucose nanglo energy khasu yoyo de ma chasa thyen thu ko mar due to example ATP mangbo shin produce che thu ko mar how many ATPs are produced only 2 ATPs are produced in aerobic respiration lactic acid fermentation da alcoholic fermentation nanglo la ATP ni mod produce chedu gomar glucose molecule chigne ATP ni mod ra gomar right so only 2 ATPs are produced which is very less compared to aerobic respiration shuma aerobic respiration now we will see that it produces more than 30 ATP molecule aerobic respiration now glucose molecule chigne ro ATP sumjul has produce chigor exact number ngazu chela chi gen ha ko ro so but in anaerobic respirations lactic acid fermentation the alcohol fermentation now ATP ni mod produce chigoma which is very less okay so uh, it is the it shows how much energy does yeast cells and muscle cells they get from one glucose molecule okay so din nanglo la yang kina zo khare ha go la win ba na lactic acid fermentation nanglo enzyme khari yore lactate dehydrogenase pyruvic acid jomare tadi kina zo lokte bhaji diagram reda so glucose ne cheni pyruvic acid bhadola khari me dige sama glycolysis ki step ro from here to here it is glycolysis so glycolysis ke end product the pyruvic acid ro so pyruvic acid lactic acid convert cheyala khari yore enzyme lactate dehydrogenase yor ro ani di nanglo la enzyme di lactate dehydrogenase ro para de la agent dikhare reducing agent dikhare na oxidizing agent dikhare na NADH plus H plus di charu which is oxidized to NAD plus so electron is lost so it is oxidized okay and pyruvic acid is reduced to lactic acid so NADH the kharcha reducing agent chagdo sorry reducing agent cha so dinanglo reducing agent thagara re ro ni enzyme khar khar yore la wim bana pyruvic acid ne alcohol la convert che dizam bata pyruvate decarboxylase ta alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme ni to two enzymes involved in alcoholic fermentation so this is important the name of the enzyme for competitive examinations so you may be asked name this enzyme okay so dinalo la production di khechambure ATP khachu produce chigye me ki thanga di khechambure ni enzyme gi ming okay so deche the next azu gi di information dilatani da information dilatani since we are talking about the production of ethanol fermentation or alcoholic fermentation ga keji shedu zamba talk about the application of knowledge dinalo la khari la yore lawim in naturally fermented alcoholic beverages like chang azu gi chang ro joma beer ro so in naturally fermented alcoholic beverages the alcohol concentration in those beverage is less than 13% always less than 13% ai di khachin re lawim ba na azu nge khala so chang nge wala azu phab ge la so phab na la khari yor la so yeast yor la so yeast they are poisoned by the alcohol they produce themselves yeast ki fermentation chain ni alcohol produce chigor but alcohol ki concentration 13% le mang acha wi ba na yeast cell khoran zu shidugor through alcohol poisoning right alcohol concentration if it goes above 13% the yeast cell they themselves they die right so therefore in naturally fermented alcoholic beverages the alcohol concentration is always less than 13% 세우충소 창다 비어다 된수 나올라 와인다 된수 나올라 alcoholic concentration joro alcohol concentration di khatuine 13% le nyungares di yingo yumzen karela wimbana ferment chengi organism yeast cells joro yeast cell khoranzo shidugor 13% le manga cha wimbana so tang azula ni alcohol 13% le manga yo whiskey da brandy da rum la den zuna la alcohol concentration maru ngazu khandis tangor 13 gi above la ngazu khandis tangor la wimba na so how can we get more concentrated alcoholic beverages right whiskey da brandy da rum den zuna alcohol concentration choksum le bed manga yor adi ngazu khandis swe tu gore la na right we do something called distillation right alcohol distillation so factory now distillation process chiro so you can read about distillation so the question di gana kira answer seda okay so in the next video we will be talking about aerobic respiration. That dinge the ngazu khar jangre anaerobic respiration ga taswa. Pyruvic acid khar cha do. In anaerobic respiration, pyruvic acid, which is the end product of glycolysis, it is broken down into lactic acid, which is called as lactic acid fermentation, and it can be also broken down into ethanol by such as yeast cells. They break down pyruvic acid into ethanol and carbon dioxide, and this is called as alcoholic fermentation. Right. So these are anaerobic respiration. In the next video, we'll be talking about what happens to pyruvic acid in case of aerobic respiration. So organisms which perform aerobic respiration, what those organisms do with the pyruvic acid of glycolysis. Glycolysis nalola pyruvic acid soyodi higher organisms nalola aerobic respiration chingi organism ngaju subu nalola ni pyruvic acid dikhari chungo. There's something called Krebs cycle. So next video we'll be talking about Krebs cycle, aerobic respiration. So please read about Krebs cycle. It is also called as TCA cycle, tricarboxylic acid cycle ke law. Kiranzu lotem nalola section 14.4 nema loya gotsua. Read section 14.4 aerobic respiration and then read about TCA cycle. Okay, and then you can watch the next video.